I'm sure you've noticed those huge trucks parked for hours with their engines running and that constant purr that seems to never stop. And then the question arises, why don't they just turn them off? Isn't it an unnecessary waste of diesel? Behind this practice, which at first glance seems illogical, there are reasons that are much more interesting than you might imagine. Reasons that can make the difference between a safe trip and a disaster on the road, because disasters can and do happen. For a truck driver, the trailer isn't just a vehicle for work, it's literally their office, their bedroom, and often their only refuge for weeks or even months on the road. Some drivers spend 300 days a year living in that cab. It's their entire world compressed into a few square feet of metal and upholstery. That's why the first big reason to keep the engine running is simple: to survive the weather. Just imagine being on a highway in Canada with the thermometer reading -20 degrees. Without heating, the cab becomes a freezer in minutes. Your breath turns to ice on the windows. Your water bottle freezes solid. Now think about the opposite: a coastal city in Colombia where the heat index can exceed 45 degrees, turning the interior into an unbearable oven. Without the engine running, there's no air conditioning, and without air conditioning, there's no real rest. And a driver who doesn't rest well is sooner or later a danger behind the wheel. It's that simple. But let me tell you, it gets even more extreme than that. In places like Saskatchewan or Alberta during winter, temperatures can drop to -40 degrees, and with wind chill, it feels like -50. At those temperatures, frostbite can set in within minutes. If a heating system fails in those conditions, drivers have to rely on emergency equipment like portable heaters or gas torches, and even then they might only buy themselves a few hours. The windows and windshields freeze over completely, turning into sheets of ice that have to be scraped off just to see the road ahead. In situations like that, keeping the engine running isn't about comfort. It's literally about survival. However, comfort and survival aren't the only reasons, although they're certainly among the most obvious. From a technical standpoint, a heavy truck is never ready to move if it doesn't maintain sufficient pressure in its air brake system. These brakes don't work with hydraulic fluid like the ones in your car. They work with compressed air. Let me explain how this works. When the engine is running, it powers a compressor that fills the air tanks and keeps the pressure stable, typically around 120 to 140 psi. If the engine is turned off for too long, the pressure gradually drops. And here's the critical part. When the pressure falls below a certain threshold, usually around 60 psi, the brakes automatically lock for safety reasons. It's a fail-safe design. And that 40-ton trailer simply won't move, at least not until the compressor refills the system. And guess what? To do that, you have to start the engine and leave it running for several minutes, sometimes 10 or 15 minutes, depending on how much pressure was lost. So ironically, turning the engine off can actually waste more time and fuel than just leaving it running in the first place. In addition, the entire electrical ecosystem of the cab depends on those batteries. We're talking about refrigerators to keep food fresh for days on the road, microwaves for hot meals, television for entertainment during those long, lonely nights, interior lights, phone chargers, GPS navigation systems, dash cams, and a whole array of other devices. And as you might expect, these appliances consume a lot of energy. A typical sleeper cab can draw anywhere from 30 to 50 amps when everything is running. Without the engine recharging them, the batteries would be completely drained in just a few hours. That's why idling acts as a constant generator that ensures life inside the truck continues to function. And there's another key detail that many people don't consider: extreme weather and engine oil. At low temperatures, diesel engine oil thickens dramatically, losing its fluidity and lubricating properties. It can become as thick as molasses. If a truck driver turns off the engine, especially for many hours in intense cold, When they try to start it again, the startup will be extremely difficult. The engine has to work incredibly hard to turn over, forcing the parts and wearing out critical components, sometimes even more than keeping it idling continuously for several hours. And yes, constantly starting and stopping a giant diesel engine can actually cause more damage than leaving it running. Each cold start is hard and stressful for the truck. The oil takes time to circulate through all the passages and reach every component. During those first crucial seconds, the parts are working without proper lubrication, grinding against each other with minimal protection. The turbocharger, which can spin at speeds exceeding 100,000 RPM, needs time to cool down properly after a long haul. The metal inside can be glowing hot, and shutting it down immediately can cause thermal shock. That's why experienced drivers follow a specific routine. After a long trip, it's recommended to leave the truck idling for 2 or 3 minutes before turning it off. This allows the turbo to cool down gradually and the oil to continue flowing, preventing damage to the bearings and seals. Some drivers I've spoken with say they've seen trucks with turbos that failed simply because drivers didn't follow this cool down procedure. And replacing a turbocharger? That can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 in parts and labor. When drivers arrive at a rest stop, many of them keep the engine running while they fill out their logbooks, do their paperwork, and organize their cab for the night. In the morning, they start the truck early while doing their routine safety checks, inspecting tires, checking fluid levels, examining the cargo, and making sure everything is secure. This warm-up period isn't wasted time. It's an essential part of the pre-trip inspection that keeps everyone on the road safe. But there's more to this story. Security systems, alarm systems, satellite tracking devices that allow companies to monitor their valuable cargo, auxiliary heaters, and much more all depend on that constant power supply. A truck that's turned off can be left vulnerable and unprotected. And no one wants hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of merchandise to disappear overnight. Some loads, pharmaceuticals, electronics, high-value goods, are worth more than the truck itself. In those cases, keeping the engine running isn't just about comfort. It's about protecting a massive investment. There's also the issue of refrigerated trailers, or reefers, as they're called in the industry. If you're hauling perishable goods, frozen food, fresh produce, temperature-sensitive medications, that refrigeration unit absolutely must keep running. These units either run off the truck's power or have their own diesel engines, but either way, they can't stop. A single mechanical failure that causes a temperature deviation could spoil an entire load worth tens of thousands of dollars. In cases like that, leaving the engine running isn't optional. It's mandatory. Of course, it's not all positive. A heavy truck consumes about a gallon of diesel per hour when idling or running at idle speed. At current diesel prices, that's roughly $3 to $4 per hour, which adds up to $75 to $100 per day if the truck idles around the clock. Just multiply that by hundreds or thousands of trucks in a fleet, and the expense reaches into the millions annually. For large trucking companies, fuel costs can represent 25% to 30% of their total operating expenses, and idling is a significant contributor to that figure. In addition, prolonged idling causes a problem called wet stacking or sludge buildup. When a truck is running for hours without working at full load, combustion isn't complete. Some of the diesel fuel doesn't burn properly and instead leaks past the piston rings into the crankcase, where it mixes with the lubricating oil and reduces its viscosity. And as you might guess, thinner oil is oil that no longer protects the internal parts as effectively. This accelerates the wear and tear of bearings, cylinder walls, piston rings, and even the turbocharger. Over time, this can lead to expensive repairs and shortened engine life. An engine that should last 1,000,000 miles might only make it to 700,000 or 800,000 hours if excessive idling is a problem. For all these reasons, transport companies have started to use sophisticated telematics systems that measure exactly how long each truck spends idling. These systems send real-time alerts to fleet managers, limit unnecessary hours, track fuel consumption patterns, and help save fuel while extending the life of the fleet. Some companies have implemented idle time limits, penalizing drivers who exceed certain thresholds. Others offer bonuses for drivers who minimize their idle time through smart planning and the use of alternative technologies. Speaking of alternatives, there are solutions designed to reduce idling. Auxiliary power units, or APUs, are small generators mounted on the truck that can provide heating, cooling, and electrical power without running the main engine. These units burn much less fuel, often 10 times less than idling the main engine. However, they're expensive to install, costing anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000, and they require their own maintenance. Battery-powered systems are also becoming more popular, using advanced lithium-ion battery banks that can power the cab for 8 to 10 hours without needing a recharge. But again, these systems represent a significant upfront investment that not all drivers or small fleet owners can afford. Truck stop electrification is another option. Some rest areas offer plug-in stations where trucks can connect to shore power for heating, cooling, and electrical needs without running their engines at all. But these stations aren't widespread yet, and they often come with hourly fees that can add up. In remote areas or on less traveled routes, they simply don't exist. But here's the reality. In practice, the story is different from what technology recommends. Although modern solutions suggest turning off the engine and using alternatives, many truck drivers continue to leave it running when conditions require it, whether due to extreme weather, safety concerns, cargo protection, or simply because they know from experience that restarting a cold engine can be more harmful than leaving it running for hours. There's also a human element here that's often overlooked. Truck driving is an incredibly demanding job. Drivers spend weeks away from their families dealing with tight delivery schedules, traffic, bad weather, and the constant pressure to keep moving. That cab is their only personal space, their only comfort zone. When they finally get a few hours to rest, they deserve to be comfortable. They deserve to sleep in a climate-controlled environment, to have hot food, to watch a show and relax. It's not about being lazy or wasteful. It's about maintaining their mental health and quality of life in a job that already asks so much of them. Now, it's not laziness or whimsy. Truckers leave their engines running because their lives, their rest, their cargo, and even the mechanical integrity of their vehicles depend on it. The next time you see a trailer vibrating in a parking lot with that familiar rumble, remember, that sound isn't waste. It's the sound of a giant that can never quite fall asleep. It's the sound of someone's home on wheels, their livelihood, and their commitment to keeping our economy moving, 1 mile at a time.